There are stories priests aren't supposed to tell, not because they're too dark or too unholy, but because they remind us that faith isn't always light. Sometimes it's hunger. Tonight's story comes from an old parish record, one never meant to be read aloud. What you're about to hear is the account of a priest who listened to something he shouldn't have. A confession that didn't end with forgiveness. My name is optional narrator name, or I'm your host from NightLore. And this is the confession. Sit back, listen closely. Because sometimes the thing that asks for absolution is already beyond saving. I remember that night more clearly than any sermon I've ever preached. The storm hadn't stopped for hours, rain pressing against the stained glass thunder, rolling across the hills like some distant judgment. The church was empty, except for the candles and me, and for once, I was grateful for the silence. I had buried 2 parishioners that afternoon, blessed a dying man before dusk, and returned to find the rectory boiler groaning its last breath. I told myself I'd close early. God, I wish I had. It was a little after 9 when I heard the door open. A breath of wet air drifted in, and then footsteps, hesitant, uneven, the kind that belonged to someone who didn't want to be there at all. I straightened in the confessional half, expecting one of the usual regulars, a drunk, ashamed of last night's words, a widow mourning too loudly in her solitude. But when the curtain slid across, I heard nothing at first, only the sound of damp clothes and a faint rasp of breath. "Forgive me, Father," the man finally said, "for I have sinned." The words were familiar, rehearsed, but there was something hollow underneath them, like an actor reciting lines he no longer believed. God is always listening. "My son," I replied automatically. "Speak freely." He hesitated. The air itself seemed to pause with him. Then his voice came again, softer, steadier, as if memory had found its rhythm. "I grew up on a farm," he said. "Just me and my mother. Out past the river bend, where the road turns to gravel. We didn't have neighbors, not close ones anyway. She was a believer. She didn't just read the word, she lived it. I could hear something almost tender in the way he spoke of her. He described her candlelit prayers when storms came, her carved crosses on every fence post and barn door. The way she said the symbols reminded the Lord that we were watching back. It wasn't much of a life, he said, but it was ours. She'd smile and say the Lord provides. Even when winter came and all we had was onion skin broth, she called it French soup and made me sit up straight like we were in a cafe. She made suffering sound like theater. His tone dimmed. Then the animals started changing. First, Pearl the hen. She stopped laying, started walking in circles. One morning, I found her standing still, her stone eyes leaking something dark, red like syrup. Mama whispered over her, and the next day Pearl was gone. Buried, she said, but I never saw a shovel. I kept my breathing slow. I've heard confessions that wandered through madness before, but there was a clarity in his telling that unsettled me. Then it was the other hens. Then the goat Moses. Their eyes all wrong, like they'd seen something that didn't fit inside this world. The garden followed carrots, split in half potatoes, hollow black on the inside. Mama said it was a test. She prayed harder than ever. Some nights I'd wake up and find her kneeling by the kitchen window, whispering the psalms into the dark. She said the Lord was listening. I think something else was. The candlelight flickered across the thin lattice between us. I could hear his breath quicken. She never panicked. She kept smiling. Told me we'd be fine, that faith meant giving more when we had less. One morning, she wrapped her hands in a shawl, like she was cradling something, and told me, "Go to town. Find someone cold, someone hungry. Bring them here. The Lord rewards kindness." So I did. He paused. Rain hissed against the stone outside. I found a man near the train yard, old, half asleep under newspapers. I told him we had soup and a place to rest. Mama greeted him like family, fed him stew bread still warm, called him brother. She told me to thank God for sending him. He slept in the barn that night. He drew a long, trembling breath. The next morning, he was gone. Mama said he'd left early, grateful. She said he traded us things before he went. There was meat on the table that day. Real meat. She called it a blessing. I didn't ask where it came from. A bead of sweat rolled down my temple despite the chill. The man's voice didn't crack. It steadied, almost peaceful, like he'd told this story before, to himself maybe, or to someone who never listened. After that, she sent me to town every few weeks. Always the same, find someone alone hungry. Bring them home. She'd feed them, pray with them. In the morning, they'd be gone and we'd have meat again. That's when she started the new ritual. He swallowed audibly. She took out white linens from the drawer ones we only used at Christmas and draped one over her head like a veil. Told me to do the same. She said, "We hide our faces so God doesn't have to watch us eat." Then we'd whisper a prayer. "Lord, bless this meal, bless the soul who gave it, and keep our hands from shaking as we take what was given in grace." We said it 3 times before touching a spoon. He exhaled slow and hollow. I thought it was strange, but I was a child. You trust your mother. You believe holiness can't look wrong. The booth felt smaller then. The storm had quieted outside, but inside the air thickened until even the wood seemed to creak beneath the weight of what he hadn't yet said. I was 13 when I found it. He continued. We'd started raising pigs by then. One morning, I was dumping the scraps, the ones Mama said weren't fit for stew. Something white floated in the slop trough. I thought it was a chicken bone. When I picked it up, it was soft. It had a nail. He went quiet. I pressed my palm against my thigh to keep it from trembling. I showed it to her. He said finally. Held it out like a question I didn't know how to ask. She looked at it, then at me, and said, "Some lambs are meant for the altar. Like scripture, like I should have known." My throat burned, but I stayed silent. This was his confession, not mine. She said the desperate ones, the forgotten, they had nothing else to give, so when they offer themselves, we are supposed to receive it. That's what makes us holy. He laughed once, a dry, empty sound. I believed her. I wore the veil that night. I ate the stew. I tried not to taste what I already knew. He felt quiet for a long time. Only our breathing filled the space between the wood panels. When I turned 15, I ran, he said at last. Took what I could carry. I never went back. He told me about foster homes therapy, how he tried to eat like normal people again. Every diet, every fast, every attempt to scrub the hunger away. But food turned to ash in his mouth. I thought it was guilt, he said. Then I thought it was trauma. Then I realized it was something else. I wasn't starving for food. I was starving for what she taught me. I closed my eyes, praying for words. There were none. I tried to fight it, he whispered, for years, but it never left. The hunger's patient. It waits. It whispers scripture back to you in her voice. He drew another shaking breath. I met someone last winter, a man by the station again. I told myself I just wanted to help. I offered him warmth, food, a shower. He thanked me, called me an angel. My hands clenched. I let him eat first, gave him my towel, my tea. Then I went to the drawer. The linen was already there. I'd bought it months before. I think I knew this would happen. The booth felt too small to breathe in. The stew was rich, he said softly. I whispered the prayer 3 times. When I finished, I felt full for the first time in years. Silence, then calm as a closing hymn. What should I do, Father? My mouth was dry. There are burdens we inherit that were never meant for us. I managed. But they can still be laid down. You must turn yourself in. You must never do this again. He didn't answer. Only the faint rustle of fabric. When I looked through the slats, the other side was empty. He had vanished. I stayed in the booth for a long time after he left too long. The candlelight had burned low, and my reflection in the lattice looked like a ghost peering back. I told myself he had slipped out quietly ashamed, as so many do. But the air still felt heavy, like his breath had stayed behind. I whispered a prayer for him and for myself, then rose and went to extinguish the candles. The church was silent, except for the storm's distant rumble. I checked the doors, the pews, the aisles, nothing but the faint smell of rain and the echo of my own shoes on the stone. When I finally stepped outside, the sky had opened again. Water streamed down the steps, and the lamplight looked like melted glass. Sleep didn't come easy that night. I sat at my desk, reading the same verse over and over, without understanding a word. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. But the words refused to comfort me. I kept hearing his voice. The calm way he said, the stew was rich. I imagined him at his table, the white linen over his head, whispering the prayer. By dawn, I had convinced myself it wasn't real. I told myself he was disturbed, delusional, haunted by guilt and memory. I've heard men confess to worse things that turned out to be nothing but fevered dreams. That's what I told myself until the police came 2 days later. They were looking for a man. Someone had disappeared near the train station. Homeless, no family. The officers asked if I'd seen anyone unusual around the church that night. I said no. The younger of the two thanked me, but the older one lingered. He looked around the sanctuary at the candles and the pews and said, "Storm like that. Makes people do strange things, doesn't it?" After they left, I sat in the front pew until my knees went numb. I kept thinking about the way the confessor had said it. She said, "The Lord rewards kindness." For a week I went about my duties as usual. Mass hospital visits the endless rhythm of ritual that keeps you from thinking too long about anything. But the feeling never left. It was in the way the air turned colder in the rectory, the way the food in my mouth lost its taste. Even water felt heavy on my tongue. Then came the smell. It started faint like copper coins left in the rain, then stronger, sour and metallic, a ghost of rot that clung to the walls. I scrubbed every surface, burned incense, opened windows, even in the cold. It would fade, then return, always near the confessional. One night, long after midnight, I heard the booth door creak open. I thought it was the wind, until I heard breathing soft, measured, patient. I lit a candle and crossed the aisle. The booth was empty. The curtain stirred once, as though something had slipped past me. The candle flickered, guttered, then went out. I told myself it was exhaustion, nothing more. But sleep brought dreams that felt like memory. I saw a table covered in white linen candles burning low. I saw a bowl of stew steaming in the dim light. Across from me, a shape sat motionless beneath her veiled lips, moving in prayer. I woke with the taste of iron on my tongue. The next morning, I went to the police station. I told them everything I could remember except the confession. I said a man had come in that night, strange, agitated. They checked their records. No name matched. No one fit the description. They thanked me and sent me home. That evening, I received a call. Another disappearance. A woman this time, someone the officers had spoken to only hours before. The sergeant's voice was tight when he said, "If you remember anything farther, anything at all, call me." I didn't call. Instead, I went back to the church and locked every door. I sat in the confessional, again candlelit, waiting. The air smelled of damp wood and something else underneath it. I prayed until my throat hurt. And then I heard it. 3 knocks on the other side of the screen. Slow, deliberate. "Forgive me, Father," a voice said. But it wasn't his. It was hers. The voice of a woman, soft trembling, yet steady enough to know what it wanted. "For I have sinned." My skin went cold. I couldn't speak. She began to whisper the same story. The farm, the hunger, the faith. The words were almost identical, but told in a different rhythm, like a song learned from someone else's mouth. When she reached the part about the stew, I felt the walls breathe. The candle flame bent toward the screen, as though pulled by her voice. When I finally found my voice, I asked, "Who are you?" Silence. Then a faint, wet laugh. "You know me, Father. We all have mothers." The flame went out. I stumbled out of the booth, heart hammering, and swung open the door on the other side. The seat was empty, but the air was heavy with the smell of broth and iron. On the floor lay a folded white linen napkin, damp at the edges. I burned it that night in the courtyard. The cloth turned black before it caught fire. The smoke rose straight up, no wind to move it. Days turned into weeks. The police found nothing. The disappearances stopped for a while. But the hunger never left the walls. The church grew colder. Parishioners stopped coming after dark. Sometimes during confession, I catch the same scent again, the faint sweetness of cooked meat, the whisper of steam. And once, when I left the booth, I found a bowl set quietly on the altar. It was empty, but the spoon was wet. I tell myself, it's a prank, that someone heard the stories and thought to mock me. But sometimes late at night, I hear footsteps in the nave. Slow, deliberate, barefoot against the stone. They always stop outside the confessional. I've moved parishes twice since then. Every time the smell follows, there are nights when I dream of that man's face, but it's hers when he turns to me. There are nights when I wake with a prayer on my lips. Words I didn't mean to say. "Lord, bless this meal. Bless the soul who gave it, and keep our hands from shaking as we take what was given in grace." I don't eat much anymore. Most things taste like paper. Sometimes I forget to eat at all. But when the hunger comes, it's not for food. It's for silence, the kind that sits heavy in a church after confession, the kind that tastes of mercy turned sour. Last week, I drove out past the river bend, where the road turns to gravel. The farmhouse isn't there anymore, just an empty field and the faint outline of a foundation. But the earth smelled rich, like something buried deep had been feeding it for years. On the way back, I stopped at a diner off the highway. The waitress smiled and poured me coffee. She asked if I wanted soup, said it was homemade. I almost said yes. I almost asked what kind, but when she turned, I saw a small white napkin folded in her apron pocket. Clean pressed, flat, a single dark thread running through the corner. I paid and left before the soup arrived. Now every storm brings that same restlessness. Every knock on the church door makes me flinch. Sometimes I think about that night, about the man who came to confess. I wonder if he was ever real, or if something older just needed a voice to enter the world again. If confession is meant to cleanse the soul, then what happens when the sin itself is contagious? What happens when the act of listening is enough to let it in? The other priests tell me I look thin, that I've been skipping meals. They don't hear the knocks, they don't smell the air. But I do. And sometimes when the hunger gets too strong, I light a single candle, sit in the booth and wait. Because mercy, I've learned, has to feed on something. Some say the church was demolished years ago. Others swear they've seen a light still burning inside, flickering behind the glass when it rains. No one knows what became of the priest. But every few months, police find a folded white napkin on the altar, clean pressed and damp at the edges. Maybe it's mercy. Maybe it's a reminder. Or maybe the hunger just found another listener. If you ever find yourself alone in a storm and you hear 3 knocks at the church door, don't answer. You've been listening to NightLore. If you enjoyed this story, leave a light burning and a prayer for the ones who still hear it. Until next time, stay in the dark and stay listening.